Alrighty. Night Awls Capitano Gregor is an exceedingly fun ID to build around. While there's a lot of hard meta builds out there centered around Tremor or Bleed purely, I'd like to execute upon some real jank strategy for this one. So out of the way first, I would not recommend people to build a team with him this way necessarily. However, we do get access to some really fun tools this time around. First off, Man is based off of Alan from Library of Ruiners General Receptions. He's a member of the Night Awls, a syndicate under the thumb. Under threats of being purged, they took a desperate gamble to grab books from the library to sway the fight over old N-Corp in their favour. This would have saved them from the purge and given them a one-up on the index. However, as with all that venture into the library, things don't go quite as planned. Regardless, everyone posits this guy as a single target extraordinaire. Weirdly enough, the closest way I can describe this guy is PSO2's Gunner. Real high single target damage, but heavily reliant on a single status effect / mark, makes things very awkward. In Gunner's case, this was chain and chain trigger finishes, which had the main issue of dying with a target and needing its stacks to be rebuilt. In many ways, they are similar. This is due to his unique status effects being open, deep, and fatal wounds, all of which require him to hit a target multiple times in a row to stack it up for stronger and stronger returns. Notably for Bind, Bleed Count on Tremor Burst, and finally improving both effects substantially for a number of turns equal to the stack before resetting it. While this thing isn't the be-all and end-all of his kits, it does enable a lot of his additional damage. For that be-all and end-all though, we instead want to look at Mercy. This single coin shank is a surprisingly strong second S1 that scales off of missing HP on target. Under specific conditions, it can be reused multiple times a turn. As fights drag on and more of its conditionals are met, we can see this thing proc constantly. While most things don't last long enough to get to the 20% window to proc Mercy quite as often in Limbus, in harder difficulty fights or team compositions with older IDs, we can supplement their damage with this on-demand executes. As for the rest of his kits, it's rather straightforward, much like his original counterpart. Functionally, he is John Pierce. His S1 gives him haste while applying Tremor and Bleed potency. As with all his skills, it also applies his unique status. The S2 is much the same, but with more coins and instead applying count rather than potency. Instead of getting haste though, we get Tremor potency and burst upon winning clashes instead. Functionally, this is a free activation of his unique status once it hits the deep wound stage. Aside from that, if the target is 20% or under, he'll Mercy after hitting it with his third coin. He'll also Mercy if his status is on the fatal wound stage. Regarding his S3, it comes in two versions, first being a fusion of his S1 and S2, first bursting on a clash win, then applying a fair bit of status. The last coin also applies amplitude conversion into Tremor Hemorrhage, giving anyone with access to Tremor Burst some more damage to play with. Likewise, this last coin also Tremor Bursts and can proc Mercy if the target is at 20% HP or under, else has Fatal Wound. The second version of his S3 activates if the target has Deep Wound, adding a lot more damage conditionals before doing much the same as the above. Procs a Tremor Burst on Clash Win, inflicts a lot of status potency with a side of count, triggers amplitude conversion, then single or triple Tremor Burst on top of that. Oh, and most importantly, converts Deep Wound stacks into Fatal Wound stacks next turn. There is, however, no Mercy conditional on the final coin in comparison. This second version only activates on Deep Wound, so don't expect to get multiple procs of it on following turns, as Fatal Wound instead enables the rest of the kits to give out free Mercies. As for his defense skill, the run-of-the-mill Clashable Guard with some haste and tremor application. It does let him proc Mercy off of others twice instead of just once with his passive. His always active passive just restricts his Mercy to 2, unless external effects allow him to reuse it, while his fueled passive allows him to gain a bunch of benefits that extend his kit's utility and damage potential. First, if he breaks anything or kills a target, he gets 2 final power to all his skills via 2 pierce power up. Past there, his base skills all inflict defense power down if he's faster than them, which is becoming increasingly more useful with bosses having defensives slotted in most of their patterns. Aside from that, he uses his S1-2 as an assist attack if an ally leaves a target with 20% or less HP after their attack. This can proc once by default, twice if he uses his defensive skill on that turn. If there is only a single target, he'll also trigger this assist attack if that target has been staggered. All of the above makes for a single target-minded approach with some nice execution spam should conditionals be appropriately met. In group-based encounters, we'll mainly be getting our mileage out of his mercy to finish off nearly downed opponents, as well as his additional PS power that helps him string together clashes and kills. To that end, we've got a bunch of conditionals required to make him function particularly well. First off, he needs to attack often. There's a couple of ways to ensure this, but the easiest is to place him either in the first deployment slots or to under slots. Past there, we could run an ID that lets him get in an additional assist attack, though that specific ID may be a bit more difficult to properly fit here, so I'll cover them when we reach their slots. Next, we need to keep an appropriate amount of status application of both Tremor and Bleed. This will increase his coin power, boosting his skills dramatically. This part is rather unavoidable as he is a modern ID, so he'll perform far better with consistent Tremor and Bleed on targets, especially with his S3. The magic number here is 12, split between Bleed and Tremor, which is surprisingly easy with the right setup. We're going to want some sources of haste and bind outside of Gregor himself. While this only ups the damage on Gregor's S3 specifically, it does also allow us to guarantee the defense power down from his passive. The faster we are though, the easier it is for us to apply Bleed and Tremor bursts too. Considering these bursts also double as bleed counts, being able to consistently get them is appreciated. Couple that with the need for clashing to trigger bursts, as well as the additional Tremor application, and being faster than the target allows us a lot more flexibility regardless. While we could from there look for PS fragility or power, the sources of them lie mainly in the full stop package, which hurts our status application significantly since we are currently juggling two different core status effects. All that said, we do have ways of amplifying outgoing damage in some rather interesting ways. To that end, welcome to a dual status deck. We're going to do our best to make use of both Bleed and Tremor's main advantages, as well as amplify Gregor's contributions to outgoing damage where possible. He'll be one of our main damage dealers, and we'll be looking to capitalize on his capabilities as much as we can. This time I'll say we don't really have any staples here. He's quite a flexible unit, and there's many ways to reach his requirements. That being said, the plan will be to implement 2 packages and up to 2 solos to amplify his existing abilities. First, let's welcome N-Corp Don as our first solo. She applies both Bleed and Tremor while being relatively self-sufficient. As a more modern ID, she also comes packaged with status-based coin power conditionals, that of which line up really cleanly with Gregor's. Her S1 and 2 line up with Gregor's Magic 12, while her S3 needs a little more juice at 16. Regardless, since she provides us both, she can help turbo up both numbers as required. Though her application is rather weak, she doesn't eat up all too much either. Anything that has a Tremor burst attached to it also gives Tremor counts back. Bleed, on the other hand, needs far more help, and she's not going to be the one to provide that help. That being said, a lot of Ryoshu's power budget is in her egos as well. In this particular case, we're actually going to make use of 4 egos on her. Forest with the Flames is sleeper good. It's really easy to fuel and gives us up to 2 fragile for the following turn. We can slot this in before a huge burst turn to massively profit from the amplified damage. Past there we can use Red Eyes for bind and a bunch of other useful status effects. After using it, she can apply bind for free on Clash Winds, which makes bind almost permanent on any target we're facing. More luxury would come from the He slot, however. While we could use 4 Calgia without other sources of poise, it's less useful, so instead, we can explore the use of Red Eyes open. This ego is pretty cool and overlooked. It's functionally just a damage nuke that amps itself up with higher speed difference. If we want something a little more consistent in comparison, we can of course run 4th Match Flame. The extra 4 skill power goes real hard. Surprisingly, this thing is also going to be rather easy to fuel with the rest of the team's composition. 4 final power on her AoEs can hit exceedingly hard when utilized correctly, whether it be an empowered S3 or the next ego, that being Contempt Orb. I find it's a must on this particular ID. While we're not going to use it to enable Fell Bullet this time, we are going to use it for the Bleed Stim and Ego resource generation. Plus the Resonance is going to be very easy to come by here. Rather, almost everyone we're fielding has it in their affinity or their defensive skill, bar Ryoshu herself. When it goes off, it will accelerate our game plan a fair bit, which in turn will allow Gregor to contribute more through his skills. Next, we're going to look at our second solo. This is going to be Ring-san. Yes, the dreaded poster child of power creep himself. While others may claim that his count application can be unusual and unstable, we're actually looking to make use of 3 out of the 5 main debuff statuses to our advantage. Bleed and Tremor are a given, but Sinking as well can come in handy for lowering an opponent's SP. It's not going to be much, however, we'll be including other means real soon to stim up this little edge. Now Ringsung wants for 4 to 5 negative status effects on target, make use of his coin reuse on his S2, and the boosted damage on his S3. Disgustingly, between Ryoshu and Gregor, they already have enough negative status effects for both of these conditionals, with wounds and gaze practically being permanent, multiple sources of bind, including wounds, as well as of course tremor and bleed application. Between their kits, they can more than make up Ringsung's disgusting conditionals, allowing the painter to do what he does best and brush through our enemies with impunity. Of note, he has easy access to lust as well as providing us some gloom for other egos. The little pip of sloth he has as well will help us with some more conditional egos too. Speaking of egos, we're going to be abusing Crow's Eye View specifically. This thing all but activates Gregor's S3-2, haste, and bind conditional in one go, at least so long as it's Fred Spin 4. It grants free haste and inflicts 2 bind. Since there's going to be a deep wound before activating S3-2, there should be bind on the target already. While Gregor could stand to fuel this himself, we can get a surprising amount of value out of it regardless. Painter being rather self-explanatory, we can then move on to our packages. First, let's get the familiar one out of the way. Welcome to the stage, the Kurokumo clan. We're only taking the leaders on the field this time, with one of the other clan members sitting in the backfield. Heathcliff and Ishmael provide us really consistent bleed potency. As long as we can get a Lust Resonance going, they're going to be getting Dark Cloud Blade, allowing to stim all of their bleed potency numbers by 1. While we won't be getting the advantages from killing off other clan members, these two are a rather self-sufficient duo and give us much needed bleed potency to work around. Heathcliff especially has the capability of providing potency without clashing, allowing us to raise some potency without having to drill as hard into our count. Due to the next package, we may expect to get hit a decent bit, therefore his retaliation capabilities can be stretched quite a bit further. Ishmael just provides plenty of buffs to Heathcliff, also allowing him to go unbreakable with the appropriate resonances. To cap them both off, they both have negative status effect conditionals, up to 10 on their S3s. With their inclusion, we get Slash Fragility, Attack Power down, and of course Offense level down, to add to the negative effects pool. This places up to 8 statuses we can consistently inflict. 3 others may get inflicted by the painter, so we're already at a soft 11 potential status effects. Mind you, these aren't going to be the last of them provided by any stretch of the imagination. In terms of egos, Heathcliff provides Holiday, Asymmetrical Inertia, and Bind. Holiday allows him to fuel his status application further, so long as its conditions are met. Admittedly, this will get very limited use outside of specific boss fights. Asymmetrical Inertia provides us with an additional source of Fragile. Since Gregor is going to Tremor Burst before attacking with 2 out of 3 of his skills, this means that Gregor will 50% of the time be hitting a target with Fragile applied to them. Of course, Ryoshu can also proc the Tremor Burst, giving us more options to apply this Fragile from Broken Bell as required. Clock Winding isn't as important here, so we can just make use of the passive to great effect as we need it. Bind, on the other hand, is rather expensive to fuel here, especially with the Gloom requirement. However, if Bind's needs to come out, the fight is likely to be over once we abuse its effects with a full board of Lust Resonance. Meanwhile, Ishmael has 4 beneficial egos to our man, Gregor. Yes, there is a lot of egos this time, but Gregor can make use of so many other sinners' egos rather than his own, which honestly is perfectly fine in this case. Snag Harpoon is a bind, tremor application, and burst all in one, the burst being available if you do Fred Spin 4 this thing. Thank you Esku for being desperate enough to need to do this at some point during Worst Team Railways. Roseate Desire is next, mostly for pink ribbons. That passive is excessively strong, and the ego is super easy to fuel in this team. Next would be Tidal Elegy. This one is more of a luxury affair, and while it meets our bind requirements and applies Tremor, it's more of a luxury due to its resource demands. We could slap Christmas Nightmare there too, but the passive is not quite as useful this time, since we're leaning heavier into the bleed side of things rather than Tremor. Last is Blind Obsession. This thing is just pure damage and stim for Gregor. We get +2 pierce power, and of course +2 damage out of this. Regardless of all the above, these two are just really nice to have on board. On the other hand, we could have instead run the 2 pequods here. While they hurt the Lust Resonance agenda, they do potentially provide Gregor an assist attack, pride damage buffs, and some SP manipulation. But their status application is wanting, as both IDs are very scatterbrained as to how they even want to apply their relevant statuses. Notably, Ishmael has next to no count, and Heathcliff needs poise to get the most out of its application. Since we don't have anyone else who heavily capitalizes off of poise, I find it would be best to go with the Kurokumo duo above instead. Past the 2 leaders outlined above, We are of course going to take Kurokumo Hongers, literally for his bench passive, which is uninteresting slop. One ally with the fastest speed inflicts more bleed. It's good on 6 out of 7 of our fielded allies, so it's a no-brain pick in this case. Now for a rather controversial package. The N-Corp Fanatics. We're bringing in Faust and Don. We are going to absolutely abuse Whispers for sanity, as well as Nails to fix a lot of our potency problems. Faust rolls really low most of the time. She has no coin power conditionals or any way of really raising her damage. However, as a supporting unit, she provides an insane amount of sanity, as well as a lot of useful debuffs. First to outline would be N-Corp's Nails. This is a unique bleed that gives us counts and a little potency. By having both these units on board, we are going to get these stacked rather high on single targets, and a decent amount applied otherwise. Faust's S1 has an odd SP dip on Clash Win, which does enable a passive for us later. The S2 is most important, however. This applies shockingly useful debuffs for the following turn, that being a stack of paralysis and more importantly Gaze. Gaze is one of the few proper damage multipliers in Limber's company, rather than being an additive multiplier that has diminishing returns. While it only applies to blunt and pierce damage, that is all we need to stim Gregor's damage up substantially. Now, if we can activate her S3 conditionals, we are providing more damage via pierce damage up, as well as giving out a burst of sanity as well. While this added burst isn't the easiest to activate, it is still a consideration whenever it is available. Regardless, her entire kit provides Nails, letting us rack up bleed. As for Don, she's quite terrible really. But in this specific case is very useful. For one, she provides Nails like Faust, but most importantly, she provides quite a lot of tremor counts when specific conditionals are met. So long as there are Nails in the target, she applies +1 more counts with her skills. This makes her S3 apply 4 counts on use. Since there's no clash related conditionals on it, we can of course just use this unopposed on bosses to get a lot of value out of it. Couple that with her S2 not reducing tremor count on use, and she's actually a tremor positive unit. She also has some additional conditionals regarding the Fanatic status, that of which thanks to Faust is rather easy to obtain through Whispers. We do need to place her early in deployment to ensure it lands on her though. With Fanatic, she provides more Nails, which means more count. This is 3 Nails on her S1 and 6 Nails on her S3. Overall, this is quite a lot of free count to go applying. Anyhow, both these Sinners provide some very notable egos. Faust gives us Fluid Sac and Everlasting. Fluid Sac is even more SP recovery as well as healing when required, while Everlasting is Tremor's Boogeyman. This stupid ego provides a dumb amount of count and potency as well as Tremor Everlasting. This white Tremor Soul makes bursts have a chance to multiply every time they trigger. This makes this high priority to land first where possible on turns where we are looking to pay off Tremor. Here, it's kinda just nice to have since Tremor isn't our main focus. However, with the sheer amount of access we have to both Bind and Haste, we can actually fulfill this thing's speed-based conditional with ease, which I won't lie is rather unusual to consider. If we somehow get to such a sheer amount of bleed and Tremor that needs to be run through, we can slot this in and profit. Lucky for us, Faust is actually one of our faster IDs here too, having a base of 4 to 7. As for Don, we are mostly staring at Wishing Khan. The bleed count and Tremor can smoothen out status application, and the Paralyze just lets us win clashes easier. Not really a priority to use, but it may come in clutch during specific occasions. Don's slow speed can also make it rather difficult to capitalize off of during the current turn. Therefore, this thing is mostly just a status stick. Now that all the on-field units are covered, we've got a few riding the bench. First is Rodya. We are using LCB Rodya. Her passive is generically good, granting damage to whoever has the highest HP at a given moment. In most cases, this will just be Heathcliff, but depending on how damage gets spread out, it could be on anyone else as well. The high amount of Wrath is not too bad to fuel, due to the rest of the IDs we have on board, especially Heathcliff. Second, we're looking at Mexiclaire. Since we have the Painter, we'll randomly be proccing Sinking and reducing SP enough for this passive to be usable. Faust also has some ways of reducing SP. While we don't really have to dip too hard to enable this passive, we do have ways if required. The steep cost also means that in terms of opportunity cost, it's not particularly amazing. However, it is still usable in cases where we can either build up a lot of resources, make use of contempt ore, or otherwise manage to generate gloom via external effects. Regardless, there's not too many great Sinclair support passives we can make use of here. As for Assaults, we can make use of the Middle Little Brother or Sync Assault. Middle Assault is more set and forget for some easy SP recovery. Since we have a trio and pair respectively, they can get a little bump in SP. As for the live streamer, we do have enough pride to occasionally activate his passive, and doing so may grant us some nice haste when required. It is a bit restrictive, however, as it does require a clash win from the fastest. Last is very straightforward. While there was a permutation where I'd bring Ring Otis instead, we're going to make use of BL Otis. The passive is a huge damage buff against enemies under 25% HP. Since Mercy procs on targets with 20% or less HP, it is a direct buff to Gregor's kits, so we can get quite a lot of return from this passive too. With all the IDs out of the way, we can consider play pattern. First thing to consider is whether or not we need to underslot for the encounter. If the fight is going to be a focused encounter, we can cut ourselves down to 6 Sinners instead of 7. As long as Gregor is then placed in the first slots, we can give him 2 skill slots per turn instead of 1, which speeds up his application of wounds. Here we can pick whom's to drop. In most cases, it'll be the Painter, since the man mostly just provides damage instead of utility like the rest. Underslotting for Gregor means that he'll be providing up to 2 times more damage from his kit. Regardless, even if you do underslot, you won't be able to activate Fatal Wounds until turn 3, and can only benefit from its upsides on turn 4 to 6 before needing to loop it again. By underslotting for him, you make the post-turn 6 loop more consistent, as you will only need a single turn to convert open wounds to deep wounds, and a second turn to convert it to fatal once again. Anyhow, with that in mind, we're aiming to get a few things online during this free turn build-up. First, we need to get his passive up and running. This means using at least 2 sloth skills and 2 lust skills to activate this. It should be relatively easy between his S1 and the Painter's S3, but if required, we can instead make use of Yoshu's defense skill to ensure we get the sloth. Alternatively, we can of course use 2 S1s in a row from Gregor. Lust, on the other hand, should be exceedingly easy to get, and we should be aiming to hit a resin of 4 Lust whenever it is available to us. This will trigger Whispers and give us a lot of SP as well as Fanatic to Don, allowing her to actually clash when required. Past there, we're aiming to hit our coin power conditionals. This means carefully managing bleed counts through nails, and being less greedy with triggering Tremor Bursts until we reach Fatal Wound status. Once we get to the Fatal Wound turns, we're looking to get ourselves as far forward as possible in terms of bleed count. This means getting at least 2 Tremor Bursts per turn during turns 4 to 6 as Fatal Wounds ticks downwards. Functionally, this is 4 additional bleed count per turn so long as we get those bursts. S3 gets us 2 bursts as long as it wins a clash, while S2 only gets a single burst on that clash win, meaning we're more than likely going to have to make up for the bursts using other Sinners. Yoshu can offer us 1 on S2 and 1 on S3 as well. Don has 1 for free on her S2. Meanwhile, if we really need to go hard on it, we can hit the Everlasting button to make up for all the bursts, as well as getting plenty of hemorrhage damage as required. When the first loop is done, we will have enough resources to activate some more quality of life egos and make use of our lead to keep stacking status effects up. Most fights are usually over by this stage, but if we have to continue, we can start stacking up the wounds again. We'll take 2 to 3 turns before repeating the burst phase once again. Once we hit 20% HP or below though, we can adjust our strategy a decent bit thanks to the way Gregor's defensive skill works. If we're looking to proc Mercy as many times as possible, we can substitute an S1 for a defensive skill in order to proc Mercy twice off of allies instead of needing to use the S2 or S3. This helps us with consistency, allowing us to contribute more damage than otherwise using an S1 on a turn. As Mercy gets more coin power on lower HP targets as well as execution damage, it slowly outpaces S1 in terms of usefulness. More useful as well is the fact that it doesn't proc defensive skills and always hits unopposed, making for a more guaranteed source of damage. Beyond the loops and adjustments, we can find space for 1 ego for Gregor to use. Unfortunately, this is Unbrilliant Glory once again. This time we're getting quite a lot of value from the Tremor application, and some nice to haves from Man in the Scabbard. Outside of the luxuries of Unbrilliant Glory, we can look to Christmas Nightmare or Garden of Thorns. Both of those feel significantly lower value to use than any of his base skills whenever we're in a burst phase, and feel like a waste when trying to build up to a burst phase. Regardless of which patterns we need to follow, As long as Gregor can inch in damage, he's giving us plenty of returns through Mercy, Bleed Count, Bind, and Tremor Hemorrhage. While this team may admittedly feel old and not as shiny as some of the newer toys we've been given in Bleed, there's plenty of synergies that we can muster here still. Even an ID touted as useless like N-Corp Don can shine brightly once in a while. Now, I swear I'm not going off meta on purpose, it's just that the aim of most of these videos is getting 100% out of an ID's kits, even to our own detriment. In this particular case though, we were able to get plenty of returns out of old stuff, quite a lot of which you may have lying around so long as you've been playing recently. Heck, stuff that you may have gotten off banner that may just be sitting in the back due to not being all too relevant at the time. Limbus is the kind of game where, after you've been around for one season, you can reasonably obtain most pieces that you'd like to work with. And if you play long enough or diligently enough, it's something of a collector's dream, where everything is possible to collect. Outside of the Arknight egos at least. Those are probably never coming back due to licensing reasons. You don't have to be someone who's played since day one to have it all, and while it does certainly help to have done so, it's not essential. Heck, if you're not a meta chaser and are willing to play slower, or with the oddballs that you've obtained at random, you can even find a home for an off-meta setup like this one. Again, thanks for watching. This one was made more so out of restlessness and spites for hard meta status teams. Since statuses only really need to meet breakpoints to get value and don't have to be everything, I figure it was worth exploring further synergies and instead just using status as an enabler rather than the focus. If you enjoyed this deeper dive into this ID, leave a like and a comment on the video. It helps us go places. Subscribe if you'd like to see more like this one. Memberships are now open, as is the community Discord. It's a little slow at the moment, but I hope to meet some of you there. Once again, thanks for watching, it means a fair bit.